One. Welcome, everybody. Welcome to the Ed Wood Summit podcast. This is Greg Javer. I'm back again. I'm so pleased, actually, to have this group back together again. This is, if you're a fan of the Ed Wood Summit podcast, there are a few of you out there, I believe. This is the original inaugural Summit group, and you'll remember we had a really great time. But way back in the first week of January, I subsequently managed to keep the podcast moving, and we're up to, I think this is episode 19 now, as we've gotten deeper into this, and you'll recognize some of these faces not only from the original podcast, but all of these guys are guys who I'm in conversation with about Ed Wood actively, and we have various projects in motion, some of us, and Joe has been here on a number of occasions. We've reviewed some of Ed's paperbacks. Jim was here a little bit ago. Jim Pontalillo was here a bit ago, and we talked about Ed's very last published, or very last sort of known paperback TV, Lust, turning up serialized nearly a decade later in the magazine Female Mimics, which was a pretty incredible find that he made. What I'd like to do today is talk a little bit about what's been going on in our Ed Wood world over the course of the last 8 months. Let's catch each other up a bit, and then do a quick round robin, talk about Ed's texts. This has become obviously a very sort of embedded topic here in the Summit podcast. We're talking about Ed's texts as probably the most frequent thing that we've done, and trying to talk about the signatures. What do we like? So we'll just do a quick round robin, and we can free form it, and hopefully get a little deeper into that. I do want to really quickly mention our podcast sponsor, XXX Books. That's TRIPLEX books.com. Have been a great partner to us in some other projects, but I certainly want you guys all to run over there if you want to buy some adult paperbacks from the 60s and 70s at a relatively cheap price, a couple bucks for a scan. You can't beat it. You'll pay a lot for adult paperbacks online if you actually try to start collecting physical copies. And at that site, there's over 18,000 scans, over 5,000 physical copies available at really good prices. And you'll get great customer service. The site has been around since 2008. I have a really warm relationship with the proprietor, and I'm really pleased that he's been a supporter here of the Ed Wood Summit podcast. In case you're wondering how this works, the sponsor, right? You look at my amount of views, you're going, he has a sponsor? How did he manage that, right? I get free scans of books when I mention his podcast. So no, I'm not making a living off of the Ed Wood Summit podcast, far from it. But anyway, enough about me. So let's jump right in for a round of quick intros, and let's just jump right in, guys. What's been going on in your wood world here in the last 8 months as you intro yourself? So Joe, you want to go first, please?
Sure. Greg, you delve so much into the later years of Ed's career and the adult books and the adult films. And I have wallowed in that particular sty myself many times. But sometimes I find myself yearning for the earlier, more innocent days of Ed's career. And I look at the stuff that I've written about Ed since since the first Ed Wood Summit podcast, and a lot of it is about his work in the 1950s and even in the late 1940s. You know, the more innocent days. I wrote a pretty long article about Range Revenge, which might be the very first movie that he ever made, a sort of piecemeal Western that he shot for Conrad Brooks and his brothers. I did a breakdown of another one of Ed's unsold Western pilots. This one was called Tom Keene, U.S. Marshal, an episode called The Showdown. That was obviously meant to be a weekly series about Tom Keene, playing Tom Keene, or a fictional character called Tom Keene. And I also, did a breakdown of Hellborn, the juvenile delinquent film that was cut up and cannibalized for Night of the Ghouls and I think Sinister Urge. Both took things from that. So sometimes, when you delve too much into the later years, the later like booze-soaked porn years of Ed's life, as fascinating as all that stuff is, it can be kind of depressing to get through. So sometimes I find myself wanting to look back at even the earlier stuff. Although not too long ago, I just did a breakdown of Lovemaking USA, which was a documentary that Joe Robertson made. And I often talk about how, there's a Ed Wood, Joe Robertson trilogy of films, but it might be a tetralogy, quadrilogy, if you want to count Lovemaking USA, even though Ed's only in it for a few seconds. But yeah, when you watch enough of that stuff, you just kind of want to just slake your thirst or something. You just want to wash your eyes out and move on to something cheerier. So I guess I've been searching through Ed's older, more naive stuff, and although of course I'm always up for the sleaze as well. That's the great thing about Ed. Ed Wood. It's a vast country with a lot of regions.
For sure. And that was a great piece, by the way, that Range Revenge piece, all of that. And yeah, really, really good. And actually, Mike, myself and Joe, we were going to talk about it here on the Summit podcast, just haven't gotten to it. And I'm glad you put all the details out there, but another gentleman potentially could join us on that. I still want to do that. So you guys know, I still want to talk it through. And I think there's lots more that we have to say. So hopefully we can get that back on the calendar at some point in the near future. But yeah, I understand, Joe. I go through it myself sometimes. I'm kind of like, the 1930s, the Poughkeepsie, right? What I want to know more about that.
What happened to the Poughkeepsie articles, Greg? We haven't had one in a long time, man. People love that stuff too. People love that stuff about Ed growing up and being a teenager and going to high school, and people love that stuff.
It just gets challenging to find material.
Yeah.
It's quite frankly, it's strictly that. I would love to delve more into it if I could find more, Do any guys want to make a quick comment on anything, any of the pieces that Joe did earlier this year? Because you have some really wonderful stuff.
I will jump in right now and say, even just to your larger question, what's new in the Ed world, in my Ed world? I guess not that much really in the last, several months. I really am just blown away by the stuff that you guys dig up, and it's just like, why do I need to bother with this?
Well,
it's like Keith said, Greg.
That's a great thing about knowing this guy here. He just sends me stuff. He just sends me all kinds. He just sends me all kinds of crazy stuff.
You guys are willing to sort through the garbage and go into the muck and do the work, and I just sit here enjoying your findings. It's amazing,
Thanks.
And I don't know. I love that article that you did, Joe, that with the Hellborn thing. It was really good. And Keith, I know you mentioned you're working on something. You're putting something together. I'm super curious about that. I'm curious. I'm not going to put you on the spot and ask you what it is, but I can't wait to see where you're going. And Jim, your book, I mean, my God, like, talk about going deep, And also, Joe, while I got you here, I did buy and read.
Awesome.
Hey.
Awesome.
Thank you. So you were the one who bought it. That was fantastic. We're hoping to break double digits on the sales sometime this year. We're hoping to break past the single digits. So
I don't want this to seem like an ad, but I did buy it. I read it. It's really, it's
good.
So well put together. And honestly, one of my interests in all of this historically is I'm a locations hound. And you pretty much give addresses, or you and Jordan.
Yeah,
it's amazing.
Yeah, we talk a little bit about the. Unfortunately, my only way of visiting some of these locations is through like Google Earth, but I will do that occasionally. Just that's always fascinating to me. The one thing we never really pinned down that I was hoping to. We found one of the studios where a lot of the stuff is shot some of it's shot on location, but a lot of it is shot on these sound stages. And these particularly ugly sound stages with the big acoustic panels on the wall that they don't try to hide or anything. They try to put a poster over this like gray wall and like that makes it a room. I guess.
Yeah.
So they'll put like a poster and a end table and a couch or something, and now you got a room, I guess. But I was hoping to find some of those locations, and maybe they're still in use. Maybe somebody's still filming local commercials in them today. Who knows? Maybe some
I mean, for
heating
me,
and cooling place is filming an ad for them, filming an ad in these awful looking places, these dungeon looking rooms.
the book kind of, it's like there's a lot of crossover with the Ed Wood world. So for me, it's just
Yeah.
all part of that same universe. And the house where Stephen had his his nice house in the valley, and Ed would come
Right.
over, started crying. Like I know exactly where that is now because of your book, and I know the area. It's like, wow, yeah, he had a nice
Yeah.
place.
That's great.
So that was super fun. And I just want to show you guys something because I know you guys are like, I know we're not doing show and tell, but you guys are so into the books. That's reading Ed's text. Like I say, thank God you guys can do it, because for me, sometimes I try looking at the pages and the words just start melting. I'm just like, I can't process this. It's just, I don't have the brain for it. Like literally, I will try and get through a page and it just starts bubbling and it's just impossible. But do you guys know this one?
Oh yeah.
That's awesome. No,
Yeah.
I've never
Wow.
seen a copy. I've never actually seen a physical copy. That's incredible.
So this is an anthology. It's not, he's got one story in here and it's credited to Dick Trent. And you see that little check mark? Can you see that?
Yep.
Yeah.
So this is
Wow.
this is Ed's copy from his personal library.
Wow.
Oh, very nice.
Wow.
I mean, I'm pretty excited to have it as an artifact, but I can't. It's a short story, and I still can't get through it. I tried.
Which story is it, by the way?
It's called the Devil and the Deep Blue-Eyed Blonde.
I reviewed that on my blog. So to me, the short stories are just manna from heaven. They're the easiest things for me to get through. Sometimes the later porno films are sometimes a slog for me to get through, but the short stories are easy. So
Right. That's extremely rare, Mike. I mean, and not only is the copy extremely rare, but having Ed's copy is absolutely mind-boggling. I mean, that thing goes for hundreds and hundreds of dollars, typically, if it ever even does show up on auction, which it almost never does.
I mean, even if it's like not his copy, it's a sought after
Yes.
book.
Oh, yeah, for
Oh, yeah.
sure. That one's worth a lot of money. Yeah.
Wow.
Yes. Yes, definitely.
Mhm.
Greg, when do you speculate that those books started to go up in value? Like, do you have a timetable on how those books, how wood memorabilia started to become very much? I mean, how far back are we going? Are we going back to the Medved situation? Is he
I
the
think-
one who started it, or was it more the Ed Wood film, the Johnny Depp,
uh,
Tim Burton film?
yeah,
The
I
latter.
saw, yeah,
The latter.
I saw the prices really start to shoot up after the Ed Wood movie. You could have gotten a lot of his novels in paper, a lot of his paperback novels for around $40 to $70 tops before the Ed Wood movie. And then after that is when you started seeing them, people asking for $300 and $400 for them.
Mhm.
Hmm.
It's
Do
crazy.
they get that? That's the question. How long?
Yeah,
if they're asking,
they do.
Do they tend to get it, or does it take a while to move the piece? Do you know?
A guy I knew, a quick anecdote related to answer your question. A guy I knew 4 or 5 years ago, he had been sending me some Ed paperbacks and some magazines, lending them to me so I could review them. Tony was one of them. And again, when I read it 3 or 4 times over the course of a month, I'm like, I love it. And then, of course, I sent it back to him and didn't have a copy of it. But anyway, he wrote me one day, this is about 5 years ago, and he said, a copy of Mama's Diary just went, and that's the book that is the basis for the lost film Operation Red Light. A copy of Mama's Diary just went up on eBay. I didn't even wait for the chance to lose it. I literally made the guy stone cold, an offer of $1,000, and I scored it.
Wow.
That's an extremely rare book. I only know of him having a copy and Rudy Gray having a copy. That's extremely rare. But Tales from a Sexy Night, that's not far behind, Mike, in terms of how rare that is. I have not seen, I've never even seen that auctioned in recent years, quite frankly. I've seen a couple copies on some bookseller sites for, I think in the range, Jim probably knows too, $300-$400, give or take. Yeah, I don't even know how you got that. You must have got that as part of that lot that you bought, I assume, right?
No, I got this one separately. So what happened was, Bob Blackburn.
Yeah.
He and it was him and an entertainment lawyer that helped Kathy out with
Yeah. The other Bob.
Yeah, the other Bob, exactly. So the entertainment lawyer. Oh, by the way, I think my Wi-Fi is screwing up. Hopefully it still works.
No, you're fine.
The other Bob got some of, Bob got a bunch of Ed's library, and the other Bob got some of the library too. The other Bob, I don't think he's like as involved or cares as much. So he was kind of recently liquidating some of his stuff. And when I caught wind of it, I kind of did what your friend did, Greg. I went straight to Bob and I said, listen, I want a copy of a book from Ed's library. Here's my offer. And he's like, cool.
Fantastic. That's great. Kudos and congrats.
I was glad to get it, just that to me is hilarious artifact.
And even just the index, when you held it up to the screen and I could see some of the other author names in the index, that paints a picture of who some of the other Pendulum authors were. Some of those were pseudonyms. Some of those are, Scott Ray's a real guy. I could see some of that really quickly when you held it up.
I'll take a clear shot of it and send you.
That's fantastic. I appreciate that, Mike. That's great. So I think let's toss it over to Keith.
Yeah, hi. Basically, I don't have as much to say. There is something I'm working on. I don't want to disclose a lot right now because I'm still, let's just say I'm still mid-conversation. But what I was saying before, and before we started the summit, we were having a chat about the many mysteries of Ed Wood and the overlapping things. And I was saying that Greg has a lot of patience. Greg is the archaeologist. He takes his time and slowly chisels away. I have no patience. I'm gonna bust the damn thing open and try to get an answer as quick as possible. So the one thing that I am working on is really just trying to determine. For me, it's been a strange ghost that's been haunting me, but really trying to determine Ed's complete and total involvement with the Super 8 loops, and there's a sort of confusion about like how far did he go with them? How many did he do? We after a while we read into these things and we start seeing these Ed tropes, but we could possibly be creating some of these things in our head. I mean, I just want to make sure, in some way, shape, or form, and I'm in communication with someone who I'm hoping, and I use the word hoping because we're dealing at this point when we are in communication with these people. These people are older now, and we're not the few that are still alive are up there. They're getting to the point. They're getting to I'm not saying they're getting to the pearly gates, but they're getting close enough to that. And you're dealing with issues, memory lapses, or an inability to timeline things right. So I'm just saying that the one thing I am doing is I'm still trying to figure out how far Ed went with the loops and his involvement with the loops. And sometimes when you're talking to some of these people who may or have been involved in the loops, their memory's a little funky. And you only find that out as you're going on. As you're going on in the conversation, you'll start asking about something related to it, and they can't quite give you an answer. And I'm a definitive. I kind of want to be definitive about Ed's involvement with them and how far did they go. I mentioned this before to Greg. I said when Conrad Brooks says, he directed the first 19 Swedish eroticas, is he talking about the first 19 cinema classics? And the cinema classics that went hardcore, that weren't softcore. Okay, that's what we're trying to get to. And then if he didn't direct them, well, what did he do? Did he do the subtitling? And what's happening is Greg and myself, while I'm doing this, Greg is doing a juggling act. He's doing a million things as well. And he's also talking to people who have insider info But a lot of it gets murky. A lot of it gets very, very murky where we're not quite sure, where they're not quite sure how far it went. We do know he did some, clearly, because he did some features. You know, and I know of someone who was involved with the Necromania, but that guy is telling me that Necromania was a short. It's clearly not a short. It's a feature. So you know, when you get information like that, that means either a memory thing is starting to happen, or and it's vital that you keep at it. It's vital that you keep looking and keep going, but you really have to discern. You get this information, you have to like sift through it and see, okay, he remembers this. What does someone else remember? So, you know, that's what it's coming down to. So that's actually what I'm working on. When we get back to me a little later regarding the text, I just have a magazine to show you guys that Greg and I did determine had Wood writing in it. Okay, so that'll be my thing for sharing today when we get back to that. But otherwise, I'm still working on the loop thing, and I will hope to have more to report to you at the next summit. Okay, we'll take it in that direction.
Keith, real quick.
Yes.
Does Conrad Brooks claim that he has any kind of knowledge of Ed's involvement in the porn stuff? I mean, just going back to what you were saying before, like, what would Conrad Brooks even know about that? And why did he frustrate you?
You know, that's well, Conrad Brooks frustrated me for a number of reasons.
Which I'm very curious about.
He was, okay, all right. I'll tell you want a Conrad Brooks story? I'll tell you a Conrad Brooks story. We were working. There's a convention. It used to exist. I don't know if it exists anymore. For a long time, it had fallen apart. It was a convention at Stony Brook College on Long Island. All right, and it was a more or less it was a early role playing type convention where the people would do medieval fantasies and stuff like that. But somehow it developed the film section. Okay, and I was invited. I give film presentations. I've been giving them on Long Island since 95. Late 90s, I was invited in to be a part of this and come and talk on cinema. They wanted me to be a guest. So I started going there and I started being a guest. And I met another guy there. And this guy later on became the runner of the film section of this convention. He also became my cameraman for my second film. This guy had interesting film background. Anyway, he started bringing in celebrities and guests. And one of them was Conrad Brooks. So I often shared a table with Conrad Brooks. I was right next to Conrad Brooks, all right? Conrad Brooks was a mouthpiece. I'm not going to lie. He would go on and on and on, and I'd be looking for a gun to put to my head, to stop the agony, because after a while, it was just what it was. It was agony. It was like, all right, shut up, He would go on and on. I was shooting a film, and I brought stills one day. And I brought stills of my actresses. Luckily, I had multiple. We used to get the guy who developed the film for me at the time, because we're talking actual stills. This was in the 2000s, around 2006, 2007. The guy would make me doubles. I was showing him the stills, and anytime there were nude scenes in the film, Conrad Brooks, well, you got to give me that still. I want that still. I need to have it. So, all right, I got two. Conrad Brooks, give it. Sign it to me. I said, sign it to you from who? From me, the filmmaker, or from? No, put the girl's name on. I'm not making this up. I cannot make this up. He wanted me to write the actress's name on it like she wrote it to him.
Wow.
No joke. And then he had this woman around him. I can't figure out where she fit in, but she was like a Bette Midler or a Barbara Streisand or something. And she would become easily offended. And she's looking at the pictures. And I was making a World War II movie. So you got Nazis and naked women. And she'd be having a fit. But you're yelling at me. I'm showing him the pictures. This lunatic's pulling them out. Sign this. And she's like, who does things like this? I'm like, oh, Christ. One day I just packed everything up and got away. I had to move away. I was like, get me the hell out of here. Yeah. This is why Conrad Brooks would drive you up a wall.
Right.
He was just this grizzled old man who was acting crazy. That's all he was. He was just a guy who did something for Ed Wood. Everybody pulls him out, and what you got was what you got. That was the real him. This guy living in a trailer, acting crazy, sign this pic. He was the one, Mike. He was the one who claims Ed shot the first 19 Swedish eroticas. It is stated in the Nightmare of Ecstasy book. He's the one who said it. And he might not have been wrong, but was he talking about cinema classics? not really knowing the total history that cinema classics will become Swedish erotica. Did he make a mistake in that area? Because we certainly know Ed did cinema classics. We saw him. We see him pop up with the sombrero. So, you know, he might have made, it could have been that Conrad made a mistake. Once one mistake is made, the mistake is repeated.
Yeah.
And it keeps happening, and it keeps happening. And then this makes more archaeology for Greg, and it makes more things for me to bust through with me. You know what I'm saying? And then
I know exactly what you're saying.
Yeah, then by the time you get to these people, now the ones we are getting to, their memory is heavily faded or fogged.
Mine's fading all the time.
I know, you know? So that's the big thing. It's all this confusion. It's all this confusion and trying to find the right lead and always asking for that right answer. And it's not going to come that easy. Greg's got the better patience than I do. But I am working on something, and I do, like I said, I hope next time out to have much better answers for all of you. I really, really do. Yeah,
I'll be curious.
And for sure.
Just for the record, it's just from what I've heard about Conrad, I mean, he was just blown away that anyone remembered his involvement in this thing. I don't think he would be quite the reliable narrator for like Ed Wood's later downfall years, because I don't think they were close in that time. You know?
I agree with you. And I doubt there was much interaction.
Yeah.
And I think anything that Conrad was saying was an echo chamber. It
Right.
was somebody else, and he was just echoing it. That's why at these conventions, I didn't take him very seriously, because I kept feeling
Right.
like he was full of BS. So
Yeah.
I'm like, well, I mean, you see this at these conventions all the time. You run into these guys a lot.
I know people like that. Yes, there are a dime a dozen people with that sort of syndrome. Yeah.
Well, Conrad was the scourge of the convention circuit. I've heard too many bad stories of people avoiding Conrad at any cost at the conventions. That's why in his later years, when he was still alive and still giving interviews, I never tried to contact him. I think Greg is the kind of person who might have actually tried to contact him, because I think Greg is much less squeamish about doing interviews and contacting people and bothering people. He's totally.
Ooh.
Oh, Joe, I think Joe froze, right?
But
There we got him back.
he has Conrad's rambling is kind of fun. You know, if you have some distance from it, Conrad's rambling can be kind of fun. There's a whole, Greg sent me a whole documentary that's just literally, it's Conrad Brooks in the back of a car. Somebody's driving him around, and they just let Conrad start talking, and he just starts talking and talking and talking. And then it cuts, and then he's in a different car, and he's still in the back, and he's just talking. And they'll just give him the slightest of prompts, you know, like talk about Johnny Weissmuller, and he'll just talk about Johnny Weiss.
I don't remember sending that to you, but I think you're talking about On the Trail of Ed Wood, right?
After I wrote about On the Trail of Ed Wood, I think you sent me some links to other Conrad Brooks documentaries.
I may have.
It definitely came from you.
Okay.
I reviewed On the Trail of Ed Wood. I think I reviewed, I reviewed On the Trail of Ed Wood, which is at least somewhat of a coherent documentary about Ed, hosted by Conrad. But there are other documentaries with Conrad, with just young filmmakers or independent filmmakers had access to him. And one is just him literally driving. The whole documentary is just Conrad in the back of a car and just talking about whatever comes to his mind. And I think he probably would have driven me crazy if I'd, been around him. But in this documentary, it's kind of fun. It's kind of fun to listen to him. So Greg, I don't know if you don't remember it, but you definitely sent it to me. So it was something from one of your emails, or maybe even one of your articles. I don't remember exactly.
I'll figure it out. Conrad Brooks, he comes up in inevitably somehow in so many conversations that I have with people. These are great stories, Keith. Yeah, I've mostly heard Conrad seems a polarizing figure. I'm saying that very diplomatically because I know a few gentlemen, quite frankly, who had warm relationships with Conrad, and I don't know Conrad, so I
Right.
obviously want to hear what everyone has to say and what their personal experiences were, but I kind of reserve judgment to a large degree. To a large degree, there's one place where I feel it was when Peter Coe was on his deathbed at
Yeah.
the end of that Cult Movies video that includes the footage for Range Revenge and Hellborn. When Peter was on his deathbed, and quite clearly he's extraordinarily ill, and Conrad is actually saying things to him that are not even factually true. It seems that to me was one that really was painful for me to think that it felt exploitative for sure.
Yeah, that's why I think I did 2 articles that were about those cult movies documentaries, one about Hellborn and one about On the Trail of Ed Wood, and they were made by the same people. And I didn't even the Peter Coe a part of it. I maybe made some brief mention of it, but it's very, very difficult to watch that footage. It's very
It is
unfortunate to watch the footage. And I believe Peter's son is in the Ed Wood discussion group and was very, very upset by that footage. So yeah, you can skip it. It's at the end of luckily it's at the end of one of the videos. So I would say turn it off right there. So.
Right. There is a Conrad Brooks memoir on the way. Gentleman's been working hard on it for a while. So I'm actually very curious to see how that turns out.
Al Dashna, I think.
Al Dashna. Yep, exactly.
Yeah, Al.
Right.
Yeah, the
right.
Haunted World of Ed Wood guy.
Yep.
Yeah, I'll be very curious about that.
Me too. So we're covering a lot of ground here, a lot of really fascinating things. Again, those are really cool details, Keith. Jim, we got to give you an opportunity to tell us a little bit about what's been going on in Wood World for you for the last 8 months.
Gosh, how do I follow up these Conrad Brooks stories? Except perhaps to say, anyone who wants to send me $100, I will send you an article of Dolores Fuller's lingerie along with a hand-signed letter, and I will provide a personal certificate of authenticity.
All right, right on.
Let's see, check the old wallet here.
Joe, you remarked about the Ed's later years being being in a sty, I think you said.
Yeah, a little bit. It's a little bit pigsty-ish, a little bit. He was kind of living almost in a pigsty, basically, by the end.
You reminded me of one of my favorite quotes I saw on a Sleaze novel some years ago on the cover, and it said, or it was on the back when they're describing the book, it said, Gloria was kicked into the gutter and bounced lower. And, in some ways, that's a sort of a good descriptor of sort of that stage of Ed's life. But anyway, regardless, you made me think of that. I've mentioned it in the past before, I'm continuing to do some little computer aided textual analyses of Wood novels and other novels from that time period to see if we can come up with some tools to supplement, people's opinions, let's put it that way, right? On what may or may not be Ed. So I'm continuing to do that work along with Greg, and that's pretty much all I'm going to say about that on this call. One thing I thought of actually just moments ago was there was a little tidbit I could give out that I did not include in my book, The Unknown War of Edward D. Wood Jr. I thought of putting it in as a footnote, and I didn't because I don't know, it seemed a little tangential, and I wanted to keep. I feared that if I started it as a footnote, it was going to become too large, and it would be distracting from just Ed. And that was the fact that when I was the very first unit, just for anyone who hasn't read the book, or just as a recap, he went through his training at Paris Island. And then he was sent out to California to another large Marine base where he got some there was some more subsequent training they gave to the Marines before they finally put them on transports to ship them out to the Pacific Theater. And when he arrived out in American Samoa, at his first unit. He was with what was called the headquarters and service company of the 2nd Marine Defense Battalion. His second in command, who now Ed was like, as far as we can tell, was part of like a pool of office people and typists who generated a lot of the paperwork for the commanding officers. His second in command, who he would have worked closely with, was a guy from actually Falls Church, Virginia, named Schuyler D. Ferris, who in 1959 was one of the founding members of George Lincoln Rockwell's American Nazi Party. So it's just sort of a weird little crossing point of minor lights in American
Yeah.
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
American
Oh
scene
my
there.
God.
And I almost put in a little footnote about that, but I feared it might become like too big of a footnote. And that was just sort of weird. I've done a bunch. Now, why would I know that? Well, I've done a bunch of research on the American Nazi Party. And that was actually something that was quite shocking as I was looking through the old Marine records. I'm looking for Ed's name, and suddenly this Schuyler's name jumps out, and I'm like, son of a gun, what are the odds? That's real serendipity that I had those two interests and
Truly.
they crossed right in Ed's
It is
first
strange.
assignment. Anyway,
Anyway,
that's sort of a weird little tangent for the call.
Wow. That is-
anyway,
That's really interesting.
we'll talk more about that offline. Go ahead, Keith. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that was really, really interesting because George Lincoln Rockwell used to be invited now.
Did I
To show you how the world has changed. He used to be invited to college campuses and he used to speak.
Right.
He was there. In fact, you probably can go on YouTube and find one of those presentations that he gave. It was just it was a very interesting time, but he used to go and give his opinions, but he was, he had also been involved. He was also in the service. I mean, I think he had, if my memory's correct, I don't know a hell of a lot about him, but he did have a very interesting war record. And there was definitely conflict. Apparently, he had been promised that he'd be part of or play some kind of a role in FDR's New Deal. And apparently he wasn't included. He had been promised something and something didn't come through. And that might have mitigated some of the changes that he went through regarding thought process and ideas and stuff like that. He's an interesting man. It's just a very interesting character to do some research on. And technically, didn't Marlon Brando portray him? I don't know. There was Roots and there was Roots 2.
Roots 2. Yeah,
I think it was Roots 2, and Marlon
Wow.
Brando was portraying George Lincoln Rockwell. Just
Yeah.
very interesting. Just little interesting side notes that you might want to research on your own, on the side.
Yeah,
For sure.
he was a naval pilot during World War II,
Yeah.
and he reached the rank. He was a full commander after the war, and commanded all the Navy Air Force units that were in Iceland during the early part of the Cold War. Before I think at that point he had already had his political awakening, as it were, but he was keeping it hidden at that point.
Right.
And it was only after he rotated back home that he decided to fly the flag, as it were.
Right, become more vocal about it and whatnot.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's interesting.
Anyway.
It's interesting. These 6 degrees of separation are always very
For sure.
Right.
Yeah.
That's exactly what I'm
But,
thinking, Keith. It's go ahead, Jim. Did you want to?
No, I was just
Finish
going to
your
say one more thing, Greg, is I'm just a little bit limited in time, probably down to about 10 more minutes.
Okay.
Do you have any objection? I know you guys are going
No.
to talk a little bit more about paperwork and Ed's writing and stuff like that. Do you mind if I show this? I just want to show this.
No, not at all. Jump right in.
What I
Jump
want
right
to
in.
share. Greg and I determined that this has got Ed Wood writing in it. And ultimately, Greg, you can, you and Jim can go over this at some point and see what does pop up, what doesn't pop up, though it's not per se fantasy. This is more of Ed doing his writing about cinema. Okay, but do you remember me showing this to you, Greg? Film Inferno.
Oh, it's been a long time. That was a
It's
long
been a
time
long
ago. You
time.
showed
Do
that
you
to me.
remember us going over this?
I do indeed.
Okay, this is one of those cinema magazines that actually reports on at this time, the softcore sex films being made. This one focuses on the Westerns, and it talks about Hotspur. It talks about Scavengers. But the writing a lot of the writing reeks of Ed Wood, right down to some of the titles, which don't necessarily translate to films that were actually released or released under that title. But for instance, Rape at Yellow Rock, 1869, okay? And the Comanche comics. If you go into this, it basically gives, some of this stuff is a little on the naked side here. No, I'd like to share more of this with you, but I don't want Greg going through hell, having to try and put things over things. But they review Brand of Shame. They do all the nudie westerns, but the writing, and I remember Greg reading it and us discussing it, or me even possibly copying some of the pages for Greg and sending it to him. And I remember us somehow determining that this from 1970, and Greg, the publisher, is Classic Publications, okay? And they're on 2211 South Union Avenue, Los Angeles, California. And I remember Greg and I determining or feeling that Ed may have very well done the writing for this magazine, or maybe even this particular issue. And again, this is Film Inferno. You got Ushi on the cover, okay? This might be from the Scavengers. It might also very well be staged photographs, either from the Scavengers or just for this magazine to help promote the Scavengers. Okay, but Film Inferno and the writing in it, and we'll confirm this. I'll send this further for Greg and Jim to get more involved in. But it seems like there's an Ed signature to this very issue. And I didn't buy it for that reason. I found this somewhere and just picked it up because I knew it was going to focus on the softcore but semi-violent westerns from that period of time. And then it was, I don't know how I got to the Ed idea, just going through it and reading. And then I said something to Greg, and I think I sent them a copy, or I sent them some scans through the email, and just that would be the thing I would share today in terms of Ed text. Okay.
That's fantastic, Keith. To get Ed's take on westerns that are sex westerns, that's absolutely amazing. Yeah, you're talking Classic Publications, which is distributed by Golden State News, the big behemoth, right? And we don't know with certainty that Ed was writing for Classic Publications or Golden State News at that point. He had been obviously writing for Golden State News up until at least early 1968. At which point Bernie Bloom, who was managing editor, advertising editor at Classic, or at GSN rather, took him with him to Pendulum Publishing. The general notion, and there's a great Rialto report piece on this about Classic Publications, is that a guy named Marv Link made the film magazines like the one you just displayed, Film Inferno, and that he supposedly wrote all the copy himself. I've read a lot of now Classic Publication film magazines, and I think Ed was writing like them for crazy. I really do.
Greg, that's why you said that when I showed this to you. I remember you jumped on this. I think you were the one who basically confirmed what I was thinking, but whatever, you were very passionate about this.
Right. It could be me. It could be somebody else, but he seems like he's freezing up a little bit. I think we may have lost Mike too. Am I even still here?
Did everything just freeze?
I think, yeah.
Greg is meditating right now. I guess,
am I back? We had a Zoom event here. We had a bad Zoom event. It looks
he's
like.
in a meditator. Did we lose Mike? What happened to Mike?
He about at least 5 minutes ago.
Yeah.
10 minutes ago.
And I put on Underarms, so I didn't think.
No, so yeah, did he say anything? Like he just kind of just vanished?
No. He froze and vanished, and he hasn't been back. And the recording stopped. I don't know if you can hear us, but the recording stopped. We heard an audio.
Oh, now we go. Now we got it.
Keith, I froze up because you caused me to go out and do a little searching for Film Inferno. And I came across an issue talking about a movie called The Diary of Knockers McCalla.
Yes.
Knockers McCalla.
Yes.
Yep.
And I have to share the one sentence description. Obscure sexploitation feature charting a young girl's descent from virginal bride to total slut.
Now, there you go.
That cuts right through, though.
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
what more do you need?
Yeah, don't sort it. Just cut right through and get right to it.
Well, that cover, that Film Inferno cover, that was great.
Yeah.
It looked like a stage. When you said it looked like a stage, that's what it looked like to me. It didn't look like a film still. It looked like
It's staged.
it looked
Absolutely,
staged.
it's staged, and they did a lot of that when they were doing shoots. It was advantageous, and I think Greg has brought this up before as well. It was advantageous to shoot as much of whatever you could shoot as still pictures for advertising, for using in other books and magazines. You know, they stretched dollars.
Well, other movies did that as well. The stage publicity stills, that's something that movies really stopped doing. I don't know when, maybe 70s or 80s. But you'd see, I remember seeing those in the cult movies books that Danny Perry wrote. A lot of times he would use, he'd have 3 or 4 pictures for each movie, and a lot of those would be stage publicity stills. I want to point out I like that the thing covering up her breast, it was looked like a sheriff's badge because so I thought that was, that's keeping it on topic, on theme, which I thought was great.
Of course. They actually thought it out. They weren't sloppy about it. They actually did something that made sense. It fit.
So yeah, I thought that was a classy touch. Adding to the verisimilitude. But you were James, you were talking earlier about using metrics to determine what Ed wrote and what Ed didn't write, and the levels of woodiness of various texts. And I was saying that some of Ed's stuff is, Ed had so many different modes as a writer that sometimes he would write very much in his signature style. And I call that boilerplate Ed or standard Ed. And then sometimes he could turn that off and write in a completely other style. Things like The Scene of the Crime, which is a very strangely formatted story. Things like Dracula Revisited, the Rue Morgue Revisited, that stuff. Again, if you hadn't told me that this was Ed, I wouldn't have identified it as such. I wouldn't. And a lot of these early Westerns, the things that I've been covering, a lot of these early Westerns say, if I didn't see Ed Wood's name in the actual credits, A Big as Life, story by Ed Wood or screenplay by Ed Wood or associate producer Ed Wood, I wouldn't have guessed. Just on their own, not really. And when I write my reviews of those things, I'm going looking for Ed tropes, these stories, these early Westerns, they don't need verification, because oftentimes Ed's name will be right in them, will be right in the credits. So it's not like these are maybe Ed or speculative Ed. I mean, these are signed, sealed, delivered Ed. And yet still without those credits, I don't know that I would always be able to determine that it was Ed's work, because he can write very straight if he needs to under certain circumstances. And things like Tom Keene, U.S. Marshal, I went looking for Ed Wood tropes in it. And I don't know what I think I found. There's a saloon girl, of course, in these. And I thought, if Ed has a character that represents him in this, it's the saloon girl, because she's the one person in the Old West who gets to sort of dress up in the fluff and the finery, as Ed Wood would say. Everybody else is, of course, dressed in cowboy clothes, and she's the one person who gets to dress in a flashier style. So I thought, maybe Ed gravitated to that character. And then there's like an old sheriff who's talking about death all the time. And I was thinking, well, Ed writes about death all the time. He's obsessed with death. Maybe that was Ed's death obsession coming through. So, Ed was obsessed with death way beyond any horror writer or writer of, obviously if you're writing horror, if you're writing crime fiction, death is a big part of what you're writing. But Ed's obsession with death goes way beyond it. He's always talking about coffins and what happens to you in the ground and the worms eating your body. And he is obsessed, beyond obsessed with death. So death was beyond an obsession for Ed Wood. So that's what I look for. That's what I look for in determining some of his texts or his work. Is there a fixation on death and what happens during the funeral and after the funeral and what happens to the body under the ground?
Which is striking, since he ended up being on Tarawa days after the battle and then spending months there as they're having to inter all these rotting bodies.
Maybe that was where it came from.
And having to live on this island where when you left the island, your clothes had to be burned because you reeked so badly.
Yeah,
I mean, that was the standard practice when they took them off the island onto a naval transport ship. The Marines all had to strip nude and their uniforms were burned because they were just so saturated with the smell of rotting human flesh, to be blunt.
Oh yeah, that would have a huge effect on him. A huge effect on him, and that would play into so much of that obsessiveness of funerals, of burials, rotting corpses, skeletons, and skulls, being such a big part of the iconography of what he lays down. It's so important, and it seems to even almost in some ways culminate with Orgy of the Dead in so many ways, which again is reflected by his writing and the fact that he's on the set, adding to all those things. And gentlemen, before you say anything else, don't mean to be rude. I'm going to cut out. I got to take a call. Thank you all so much. Greg, keep doing what you're doing. And I'll see you guys later.
We'll be in touch, Keith. Thank you so much.
Be well.
Thanks,
My
Keith.
pleasure. My pleasure. Thank you.
This has been thanks, Keith. I'm glad. This has been a little rocky here this afternoon. At some point, about 10 minutes ago, my Zoom just totally crashed, and then it reopened by itself, and it was still recording. So I'm curious to see, did that whole first 45 minutes of the recording actually bite the dust in the process? I'm going to find out here shortly. But
what happened to Mike?
I don't know. He sent me an email actually just a couple minutes ago, and he had already sent me a couple scans of the first 8 or so pages of Tales of a Sexy Night. So I'll include those when I, link to this poem, whatever's left of this podcast when I link to it at Edward Wednesdays. But I do want to jump into one other thing. I haven't gotten a chance to sort of update. Well, you guys know my update. I normally don't smoke on the Edward Wednesdays podcast, but I'm feeling a little stressed right now, so I'm gonna have a cigarette.
Don't feel stressed.
No, it's well,
we
I know you guys are easygoing, but I mean,
Eddie smoked, so I don't know how he was getting the money for. I don't know how Eddie was getting the money for cigarettes. That's something that never comes up in stories. Like, Eddie smoked and drank, but we always hear about him scrounging up the money for alcohol. But we never hear like Eddie scrounging up money for cigarettes. We never hear. There's not one story about it.
Well, he and Kathy both chain smoking and drinking all day. That was not cheap, right? I thought about that.
Yeah. So there must be more to that story. The Ed Wood smoking story has yet to be written. The Ed Wood drinking story has been told many, many times. In fact, it's a whole chapter in Nightmare of Ecstasy. But the Ed Wood smoking story. Where was he buying? Maybe, we all know Playboy liquor, but was there a tobacconist's or something like on the same street where Ed was also shuffling down there in his bathrobe or whatever? We never hear that story. So somebody's got to eventually write the Ed Wood smoking story.
Well, I'm old enough. I smoke obviously, but I'm also old enough to have known, a lot of family members in previous generations who smoked heavily, and if you were, and I've read this, Ed chain smoked nonstop. If you chain smoke nonstop, you're upwards of 3 or 4 packs of cigarettes in a day. and people, and I've known people who smoke that heavily. I don't smoke anywhere near that heavily, fortunately. I'm still not good for me, but uh so I did want to, though I didn't kind of get a chance to, my updates for the last 8 months obviously are pretty apparent to everybody. You can look here at the Edwood Summit podcast. You can go back to Edwood Wednesdays and you can see what I've been up to. But a lot of fascinating stuff that I literally jumped into this year thinking to myself, I really want to rededicate myself to really putting the foot on the pedal, the accelerator, and seeing how much more, how deep can we take this research and how much more can we find out before it's all eventually going to be gone, right? At some point it's going to dissipate into the ether, so to speak. So I've had a lot of really wonderful experiences. It's a shame Mike jumped off or fell off for whatever reason, because he displayed back in January a signed copy of the Take It Out and Trade Blu-ray signed by Casey Lorraine. I've had the pleasure over the course of the last month or so, someone else who knew Casey introduced me to her. I had a long, very warm conversation with her a couple of weeks ago, and we've exchanged a lot of emails since then. She's given me some pictures that I've never seen anywhere before. So that's been wonderful. I mentioned to these guys, I was trying to spring on the Edwood Summit podcast fan base, a special guest for this podcast, Harvey Shane, Foreman Shane, who was in 11, well, he was involved in 11 of Stephen Apostolof's films, virtually everything after Journey to Freedom. I think he was involved in some way, shape, or form, if not appearing, involved in some kind of support or crew role. And he's a great guy. So unfortunately, this has been an afternoon of tech blunders for me. So Harvey wasn't able to make it, unfortunately. But a couple things I'll say really quickly. Earlier this year, we talked, Paul Apel and myself talked a lot about the Frank Leahy Legends script, and we did a few podcasts. There will be more to come, and what I can confirm to everybody is that work through the details, which isn't easy. Who owns the rights to these things, right? We have a book contract to put out the Frank Leahy Legends script, so that's forthcoming. It'll take a little while, obviously. We've just actually inked that here actually in the last couple of days. So most importantly, though, I want to mention it. I know that both of you guys know, because I shared this with both of you, and I asked Joe, because Joe and I have reviewed at length some Ed paperbacks, and I want to get into this. I think we will take this to the nth degree in terms of our analysis. But I also mentioned this to Jim right at the point at which it dawned on me. I was looking at a scan of an Eros Gold Stripe paperback from 1975 called Sex Salvation, and well, let's do it up, Jim. I think I might be with.
Okay, I didn't know if you had a copy on hand, so I just pulled this as an illustration for you.
I'm glad you do.
Spicy readers, is that what it says?
There we go. Yes, the spicy readers.
Spicy readers.
I get the bad glare, Jim, obviously. It looks like we both got really nice copies of it, which is great, because Sex Salvation 1975 by Raoul
Hopefully
Woody.
I can get one of you can get me a nice scan of that cover art, because if it's going to be eventually an Ed Wood Summit podcast, that'll make a nice.
I think I did send you that, but I'll send it again. Yeah.
Okay, a header image, because
right.
I'm always making the header images for Greg's.
Which are great. That's always my favorite thing. After I send the material over, I send the material over to Joe for an article, and my favorite thing is seeing what he's going to come up with as the header image. It makes it feel like I'm like some author, right? Who has copyright and layout is being handled by some other entity, and I'm a big shot, right?
Well, yeah, I remember the first time I ever had anything published anywhere was in a short story by a very, very small publisher, but they had an illustration that went with the story, and I was very, very flattered by that. Oh my gosh, they put an illustration with the story. So but it was just I think my payment was a copy of the book, so
right.
But still, but they also sent me the artwork back. They sent me like whatever the artwork was. They sent me the copy of it, and I was like, oh, Great. I still have it in my kitchen right now somewhere. I think I have it in a stack of papers.
That's cool. That's cool. That's worth mentioning, Joe. And all three of us know this, but we don't make any fucking money on this, people.
Oh God, no.
I'm sorry. You may think Jim's written the book about Ed's war record. Joe has written the book about co-written the book about Stephen Apostoloff. I do a podcast and as a sponsor. You may think all these things, but we spend a lot more money obtaining material than we do actually making any money. But we do it obviously because we enjoy the hell out of it.
We do it for the love. The
Right.
Apostoloff book, I haven't broken even on the Apostoloff book really. When I think about whatever royalties that I've made versus buying research materials and things.
Sure.
Cost of so
Greg, honestly, I think, on a good month, I can go out and get 2 coffees at Starbucks on my Ed Wood royalty.
well,
Nice.
I told Jordan, my
Nice.
co-author on the Apostoloff book, I said I got some absurdly small royalty check, and I bought laundry tokens because I live in an apartment, so you have to have tokens to do the laundry. So Steve Apostoloff has been buying my laundry tokens for the last couple months.
Nice.
That's what I spent it on.
We're rolling in it. We're rolling in it. I only say that because actually I've talked to people who think that there's some great monetary recompense for what we do.
Yeah.
Now I'm not complaining because the very first book I had published was by a professional press who promptly stiffed me on my royalties, and they said, sue us.
Right. So
Which of course, unless you now want to sue someone as a hobby, you're not going to do, because that's going to cost you much more.
Going to cost more than you would make.
that's
Yeah.
sad.
So,
That's sad, right?
but I'm just glad to have. I'm glad to have the Unknown War of Edward D. Wood Jr. I'm glad to have it because
Sure.
I've never seen it. It's rare to get a book as straightforward as that one. It's rare to get a book that just really lays it on the line. This is the information. And I was just glad to have it because you can't really go by what's said in the documentaries or what's said in Nightmare of Ecstasy, because as we were talking about earlier, I think Keith might have been the one who said it, that either a mistake is said or a mistake is made, but or a bit of information gets out there and then other people repeat it and other people repeat it, and then it becomes part of the legend. And that certainly happened with Ed's war record. It just became a legend that got more. It got ensconced as part of the Ed Wood story, and so it was great to have the real information. It was great to have the real factual information about it. So
it is amazing. That's a fantastic book. I actually sent a copy of that book to a former co writer of Ed's back in the magazine.
Oh, cool.
Paperback days, and I'm waiting to hear back from her after she receives it, because she knew a little bit about Ed's war record and actually printed an article about it in the late 1990s, kind of debunking it in a transgender magazine, and no one would have ever seen it, and it's sort of under the radar.
I've got that. Oh, so you're in contact with her, huh?
I am. I've been
Really?
talking to her pretty actively for the last month or so, and I
well, now
sent her a
this,
copy.
if anybody has a copy of this article, Greg, this has to be an Ed Wood Wednesdays. This has to be
Okay,
something.
I think it will be.
Yeah,
I think it will
I
be.
That has to be one.
I almost posted it at Bob's site and then I didn't. I'll email you guys a copy of it. I imaged it, and I'll pass a copy of that along
Oh,
to you
cool.
guys, and you can do what you want with it.
Cool. And yeah, it's actually that particular, we won't get into this right now, we'll get off track, but there's a copy of that magazine at archive.org. You can see a scan of that.
That's where I found it. Yep.
Yep. So and that's a fascinating story for a whole other, an absolutely fascinating story that's taken me down other rabbit holes with a couple other researchers in the last 2 months or so, where I guess since we're talking in all kinds of directions right now, the LA sci-fi scene of writers is very closely aligned with the same people who actually were pioneers in West Coast pornography, not only written pornography, but also filmed pornography. That's a long story for a whole other day. But all I'll say related to that is let's remember that for a brief period of time, Forey Ackerman was working as Ed Wood's talent agent to try to get his work published, and didn't really score much on that front, but many other writers. In fact, I think, Joe, since we're going off on a lot of wild tangents, Jim Harmon was a sci-fi writer who was represented by Forey in the early 1960s. And there was an article in a magazine, I sent it to you, I don't know if you saw it, but an article about Happy Days, and it was like a Fonz magazine from like 1975.
Okay.
And there was this long article written by Jim Harmon, who wrote a lot of really acclaimed sci-fi, and also wrote for some adult publishers back in the day, and also was friends with Ed Wood. He and Ed Wood exchanged lobby cards, Buck Jones and Tom Mix lobby cards.
Yeah.
Yeah, so there's a lot of crazy angles to all this. I do want to say, because I'm sure we've been at this for a while now, I want to give you guys a chance to say any final words. I want to say Sex Salvation by Raoul Woody. I've said it on a previous podcast. Would I clip off the the last joint of my finger if I lost the bet? Would I be willing to bet the last joint of my pinky finger on something being Ed Wood or not being Ed Wood? I'll bet a pinky on Sex Salvation by Raoul Woody being an Ed Wood novel or paperback. 1975, published by Arrows Goldstripe. You can check it out yourself. You can get it at XXX Books. You can find a scan there, which is exactly where I found it. And if you do, folks, please, in the order notes, mention the podcast. Just mention Ed Wood Podcast, mention Wood Podcast, something like that, because that will allow me to continue working with XXX Books across myriad fronts, equally, if nothing else, equally as much as to just keep getting paperback scans that I can go down the these fishing expeditions, because I'm very confident, and you guys know how I feel about this. There's more out there than we've yet discovered, and there will be more that we will discover. So I'll stop there, and let's final words, so to speak. Jim, anything you want to add to all of that?
Well, one question. Okay, I sent you guys those images of that issue of Transgender Magazine with that article about Ed in it. And so one question I have for you is, a couple of podcasts back, you had these fancy titles.
Oh yeah.
And they never appeared again. I thought we were on an upward arc.
Yeah, that's what I thought too. I thought, wow, we're going uptown with this. What happened there, Greg?
So how that happened was that particular piece, Rob Huffman joined me. We were talking about the France books, and Rob actually is in his day gig is works in video production. So he gave me that header and that closing image, and I have a file of that. I don't want to say I'm like lazy or a tech noob, but I have a billion things going on. Eventually, I will add those back. I can go into YouTube and to the channel and add those headers and that closer onto all of the podcasts. And I plan to. I just haven't gotten around to it yet. But yeah, we're on an upward trajectory, right?
Yeah, I was thinking, boy, this thing is getting professional now. We're getting into Hollywood territory here.
Pretty much.
And,
yeah.
I was going to say, Greg, as far as what we're doing and whether we're making any money off it or not, I'm reminded of Sarah Jessica Parker channeling Dolores Fuller in the Ed Wood movie when she says, "You people are insane. You're wasting your lives making shit. Nobody cares.
Right.
These podcasts are terrible."
Yeah.
Right.
Well, that's one thing I've found is that none of this stuff has, other than we were talking earlier about the actual books having monetary value on the secondary market on eBay and things like that. But writing about Ed brings in no money at all, which in a way is freeing, because there's nobody to tell you no. There's nobody to say, no, you can't write about this, or no, you can't present this material. I guess on the Ed Wood discussion group, people will be that way occasionally, like, oh, you don't have the rights to this or something. People will be touchy. Occasionally, people will be touchy about the rights to things, and I'm always like, everybody who made this is dead or something. Like,
Right.
yes, but what if their great grandkids or something want the right? I don't know. They're not going to. What are they going to
Right.
get? $1.75?
Exactly. There's no money in it, even if they wanted to try to. What sort of
Who's going to
foundation is
sue
there
at
to
this?
stand on, right?
Who's going to sue
You
at
see
this
that
point?
I see that in gaming all the time. You know, I collect old role-playing games, and there's really rare stuff that's been out of print since the day it was issued in the late 70s. And some people are like, God forbid anyone puts a PDF of it up
Yeah.
online. It's like this stuff. No, we're there's a lot of things where you're at the stage where if someone doesn't scan it and put it online, it could well be lost forever.
Yeah.
You know?
There are still, though, there'll be people who will get touchy about that kind of stuff, even though they don't have any claim to it themselves. I guess they're just
Right.
worried that somebody else will. I'm always like, oh, just put it out there. And if anybody wants to complain, let them do it later. We'll deal with it at that time. We'll put it out there first. And then if anybody wants to complain, well, that happens occasionally in the Ed Wood world. Somebody will put out a book or a video or a movie or something, and then people will complain after the fact that it's done. So that's happened. But I would be willing to just put the stuff out there and, you know.
I mean, you know, some of his books, well, okay, as it is right now, most of his books are available in unauthorized editions that aren't paying the estate anything anyway. That certainly has not done anything to the market value of Ed Wood originals.
And they're ridiculous. They're like
and
$30, $35.
imagine,
They're way the fuck overpriced.
They're very, very expensive
Right.
for very crappy editions.
well, if you put out PDFs of Ed Wood, that may well torpedo the ability of somebody putting out an unauthorized edition to charge $35 for a physical copy, but it's not going to do anything to the originals.
Well, you know, I am grateful that a small handful of Ed's books came out in pretty nice editions with nice new cover art, and they're in good condition. They're not. The problem with old vintage paperbacks is that they're very fragile and that they're falling apart. But I think in the 90s, largely thanks to the Ed Wood Tim Burton movie, there's a small handful, I think 3 or 4 of Ed Wood's books that came out in legit new editions, just, you know, with nice glossy covers on them, again, with new artwork on the cover. And that's beautiful. That's wonderful. They're very, very small handful. I think it's Killer and Drag, Death of a Transvestite, Devil
Hollywood
Girls,
Hollywood Rat Race,
and Hollywood Rat Race. So I guess it's 4 books altogether, and it's lovely to have those. I wish we lived in an alternate universe where one of those had been done for all of them. But personally, I'm just a greedy little piggy, and I'll just take whatever I can get wherever I can get it. And I will just say, if somebody wants to send me stuff, I'll be like, hell yeah, send it to me.
Right on.
I wonder how many of I wonder how many copies of the Woodpile editions actually exist.
Don't know, because they almost never turn up on the secondary market. They're very, very, very difficult to find.
You're talking, Jim, the physical copies, right? Not the
the physical copies.
And I know I know you had them. I don't know if you still have them, but you have the whole Woodpile.
Yeah.
You
right?
do?
Yeah.
Really? I don't think I've ever seen a physical copy.
It was total luck. They were available for perhaps 13 months. There was a very narrow window where Fender Tucker started putting them out. You had to have lucked into finding his. I heard about them through some discussion board, and just, just decided to bite the bullet. Not that it was a lot of money at that time, but well, I was having financial problems at that time. So it actually was, relatively speaking. I decided to just bite the bullet and get them all at once. And then when they suddenly weren't available, like about a year later, I was very glad that I had done that, because it was literally, they were available one day and then they were not available. And that was because of the intervention of the estate.
That's amazing. I can't imagine, Jim, there's actually all that many guys who have the actual physical copies of all the Ramble House titles. I can't imagine there's very many
No,
people.
I don't think so.
Fender Tucker, and also the editor and cover artist, Gavin O'Keefe. I've talked to those guys on numerous occasions. They're real cool guys. And they, yeah, the estate challenged it, and they had to pull them off of the market. The ebooks themselves, the scans, still continue to float around amongst guys like us, but
Right.
you can't get them, and it's a shame. It is a shame, because there's so much of Ed's work. It's been great that the estate has put out all this short work, right? All the articles, the short
Yeah.
stories. There is actually, it's worth noting, When the Subject is Sex is going to be the next title coming out from Bear Manor, and it's coming out very shortly, and that is a collection of Ed's articles for Pendulum Sex magazines.
And when that book comes out, I will do with it what I did with Angora Fever and Blood Splatters Quickly, and that is to review every goddamnable thing in it, one by one.
Right on.
And the reason why I did it that way was, I remember reading Blood Splatters Quickly. I got a copy of it. I probably got an advanced copy of it, and I was reading through it, and I was thinking, well, gosh, there's some of his tropes here, and there's interesting things to talk about in this story, but also in this one, how am I going to fit this into one article? And I said, well, I'm not going to fit it into one article. I'm going to fit it into 30 articles or whatever it was. So that's what's going to happen with When the Subject Was Sex, when that eventually comes out. And I think that has some new cover art. I think that's been circulating. I think they've posted the cover art for that, and that looks really nice.
Yeah, and Bill Shute, reviewer Bill Shute wrote the intro, and he had shared that with me, and it's a great intro. And he actually, I felt, very personally, sense of personal pride in his intro. He talks a lot about, the state of Ed Wood research up until this point, citing a lot of stuff, I think, that really initiated at Ed Wood Wednesdays.
Yeah, well, Ed Wood Wednesdays, I don't know if I've told the story of why that came about. Well, obviously, it came about mainly because of the big box of wood, the box set that came out from a company called S'more Entertainment, and I wanted to make my way through it. I got it for my birthday or Christmas or something, and I thought, well, the only way I'm going to make it through this box set is I'm going to review every single movie in it. I'm going to review every last thing in it. And that was how I got started with Ed Wood Wednesday. So it was really to push myself to make it through that entire box set, which I did. And originally I've said that the plan was to do 2 movies a week, and then the whole thing would be over in like 11 weeks or something. And that was years ago. So oh, we lost Greg.
Uh-oh.
Or he's
I think that's his white background. Did he step out? I was looking away momentarily.
He did. I did notice the collection of the games you have behind you. That's incredible. Horrified,
Yeah,
one says. Domain.
Yeah, I'm that's like my big hobby is board gaming and role-playing games. I've got, my apartment looks like a game store, basic combination game store and library.
Did you see a YouTube series called Board James? Are you familiar with that one at all?
No.
Okay, the angry video game nerd, who's also a big horror movie aficionado, a guy named James Rolfe. He had a whole series called Board James, because his name is James. And basically, he's always cajoling his friends into playing these obscure board games with him. And oftentimes it turns into sketch comedy where everybody dies at the end of the episode or something. But if you ever get the chance to check those out, they delve into obscure board games. So,
Okay.
I do a Happy Days podcast, and I think there's at least two Happy Days. There's two Happy Days board games, I think, out there in the world that I have not yet sampled. Are there any Ed Wood board games? Has anybody ever done that?
I've never seen that, actually.
Well, the one that lends itself to some sort of board game structure would be Plan 9, because you could play as, I don't know, as Jeff or something, and you're making your way around the cemetery or something, and they could have a pop-up Tor Johnson that comes up from one of the graves. Pop-up things are always big in old board games, not the kinds of board games you're doing, like the role-playing board games. Although you could do a role-playing game on Ed's on Plan 9 as well. I think it could lend itself to a role-playing scenario. So
maybe we should make one.
Well, somebody's got to do it. Somebody's eventually got to do the Ed Wood board game. There is an Ed Wood video game, basically.
Right.
Yeah.
The Plan 9 video game that I think, Greg, you devoted a week of.
You can play that at archive.org.
Yeah.
You can play that online, right on the browser, right on your
I
browser.
believe
It's
you-
really hard. It's really hard to play.
Yeah, I have tried, and I did not do well in it. And it is a role-playing game. It is a point-and-click role-playing game, and I never got too far in it. So I didn't even get to any of the movie clips that are supposed to be in it, supposedly. So
There were also, you guys may have seen this recently, but a researcher who's actually been in touch with Joe and myself, she wrote an article recently about the Swedish erotica Atari games. So Swedish erotica hooked up with
the
Atari.
Swedish Atari games. Yeah.
And at some point around later on, when Atari was starting to fade a little bit, somehow they must have gotten desperate and thought we should make sexual video games. And I think it's called the Mystique series, and there's only a handful of games. Custer's Revenge. You can actually play these games also at archive.org, but if you bought them, those games go for thousands of dollars now, original copies.
Well, I was saying to Jim about this YouTube series called Board James, but where the angry video game nerd plays board games. Well, the Angry Video Game Nerd also did a whole video about adult Atari games. And so there was Custer's Revenge being the most famous. And that was the first place I'd heard of Custer's Revenge. But then there's, there's one called like Beat Your Meat or something like that, where you were, and then Cat House Blues, where you're basically going from like, one cat house to another. Basically. Yeah. So he did a whole video about that. And Custer's Revenge is pretty politically incorrect by any.
Regardless of objectionable content, it's just not even a good gameplay wise. I mean, it's
the Custer's Revenge.
Yeah.
Where you get the arrows firing at you from diagonally, and then.
Right.
Well, I guess it's not very fun. It's a very repetitive game. I was never good at I'm bad at video games, unfortunately. So I don't think I would have much luck at it. Trying to manipulate. I guess you're supposed to be playing as Custer, I guess, and he's supposed to make it through the arrows, and then.
Right,
I don't even want to say what
Maiden.
he did.
Well, the Indian Maiden. I'll say it. The Indian Maiden. He's exacting his revenge, which you can imagine is entirely sexual. You can't tell from the shitty Atari graphics what's really happening, but that I don't remember that. I had an Atari system when I was a kid, but I certainly don't remember.
Well, I think they had trouble getting it, and they had trouble getting those games into stores. I think there was, they would have to be sold under the counter. So you'd have to know about
Right.
them, and you'd have to go up to the video game store clerk and say, do you have a copy of
And-
Custer's Revenge? And then,
And this was not yet the time of high-end graphics like they had in Leisure Suit
oh
Larry,
no, gosh,
where
the
a block, blocked out what was going on, but pulsed up and down,
well, the Indian Maiden
Wow.
in Custer's Revenge. Oh my gosh, she might as well be like an insect person or something. She looks like some
Right.
kind of oh my gosh, I don't know what she looks like. Not a person. She doesn't look really like a person. You'd really have to have an imagination. You really have to would say, wow, this is a human being that we're seeing here.
Well, that was like the Atari Adventure cartridge where you're fighting these dragons and basically you're being chased by these things that look like ducks.
Yeah.
Because that was
Wah, wah, wah. Yep.
you're the hero, which is just this little cube essentially, and you're being chased by these ducks.
Do you remember, Jim,
So-
the Easter eggs on a game like Adventure? You could
Oh,
get
yeah.
this little diamond and you could hook the bridge up in those. I played all those games when I
And
was a kid.
suddenly
It
you
was fun.
find this hidden room and you're like,
Right. Oh my God. Right. No one else has ever been here. Right. Yeah.
many years ago, I hooked up the old Atari system to show one of my nephews what we played as kids, and he just sat there in disbelief at the horrific level of graphics in his opinion, and
Right.
yeah.
Well,
his
for some reason,
loss. It's his
well,
loss.
I
really.
don't know. For some reason, we devoted many man hours as a human species to improving the graphics on video games. I don't know, like there's all these. I'm certain that there's diseases that have gone uncured,
Right.
and yet now graphics on video games are much better because we obviously devoted hundreds and hundreds of thousands of hours and millions of dollars on making them better. So
what's important, right? What's important to us as human beings? That's a big question for the Ed Wood Summit podcast.
Yeah,
That's a very,
yeah,
very
well,
philosophical question.
I've said that Ed is like anything else. It can just be the prism through which you look at the rest of the world. You can look at things and find, oh, how is this connected to Ed? Every time I see a new website or new technology, I think, how can I connect it to Ed Wood? If they're sharing content on it in some way, is there Ed Wood content on it? Is there some way I can connect it to Ed? So Ed just becomes a way of organizing the world. It's a way of focusing. There's so much stuff out in the world. Well, having an obsession like Ed Wood, it becomes a way of focusing on one aspect. And Ed, as it turns out, is not it's not one story. It's many stories. There's many different phases and aspects of Ed's career. So it's not a narrow topic at all. It's actually a huge topic because Ed's had such a varied career and life, and then he worked with such a variety of people in his casts and crews. Now pretty much the only time I ever write Ed Wood Wednesdays is when Greg contacts me and says, I can't write one this week. So on Tuesday nights, I will just panicking write something really fast. And that's how Ed Wood Wednesday. Oh no, it's a challenge. It's a writing challenge. That's how Ed Wood Wednesdays gets written these days. If I'm the one writing it, if it doesn't say by Greg Zywer on it,
Greg Javer.
It's
Greg Javer.
Well,
Sorry.
is it
sorry?
Well, I always say it always look like DZIA. Do you pronounce it Javer?
It's pronounced Javer, so that is the original pre-Ellis Island spelling of my paternal family's name.
Even when it's a DZ, so that's
a German Polish spelling. So that is Polish immigrants who emigrated to Germany before they made their way to the United States. So that's my family.
Okay,
and,
so
it's pronounced Javer. So Javer.
So both of them are pronounced Javer.
Which
okay.
I guess you could see. I actually, for a long time, it was my pseudonym, right? And I was trying to hide my family name.
I still use it. I
use
it on all your articles. So
I worry. What I worry is my mom is gonna stumble upon all this stuff online,
that's why I still
she's gonna
use
be
it.
like,
So,
Greg, really, I don't understand why.
So do you not? What do you would you like me to use Greg the JAVER spelling?
It doesn't, it's right here on screen in this video, Joe.
Right,
So I
right.
mean, the cat's out of the bag at this
So,
point. I mean,
but
right?
the only way I write Ed Wood Wednesdays now is was when Greg says, "Oh, I can't, I'm too busy. I can't write one this week." And so generally, I'll just pick a name at random or something
Right.
out of Nightmare of Ecstasy and write about him. And I think one time I decided to write about George Beckwar, the
Yeah.
guy who played my dear Professor Straussky. So I thought I'd write about my dear Professor Straussky, and he had kind of an interesting life. He had his own little adventures in life. His life didn't begin and end with being Straussky. He had experiences, and I tried to figure out who's kind of nerdy Ed Wood fan was, who was interviewed in Nightmare of Ecstasy, and generally the interest level in these articles is near zero. It's me and like 2 other people. So, but it shows you like there's this whole variety of characters. I think I just wrote something about what was his name? Bob Steele, a guy who was a cowboy actor that Ed knew. And yeah, I think his name was Bob Steele. Let's see. Yeah, Bob Steele.
Yeah.
A cowboy actor that Ed knew and tried to work with a few times, but it never panned out. And so I thought, oh, let's look into the career of Bob Steele. And I don't know why. But I mean, that's what Ed Wood becomes. He becomes a way of organizing things. It just becomes like how does this relate to the Ed Wood? How does this relate to the Ed Wood universe? And I think that's what a lot of hobbies are. It's just, whether it's writing about Ed Wood or collecting role-playing games, it becomes a way of narrowing down the world to something more manageable, because there's so much out there in the world. There's so much that can act upon you in the world that you have no control over. So if you are able to control this one little corner, if you're able to focus on one little corner of the world seems more manageable that way.
Well, Greg,
beautiful.
you need to pat yourself on the back, because if you search the spelling of your last name in Google Images, the 3rd image you currently get is a morphed image of you and Ed Wood, sharing faces.
Oh, Joe did that image. Joe certainly did that image. I remember that. Thank you. That's great, right?
Well, if let's see, if you look up just the term Javer, spelled Dziawer, a lot of the pictures that you get are Ed Wood Wednesday's pictures.
For sure.
Yeah, a lot of it. I see here. I don't know what I was thinking some week. I think you wrote an article about scarves being worn in the
neck scarves, the Swedish
neck scarves, and so
the colors mean different things. The girls, who's the lead girl, the supporting girl, they wear different color scarves. Yeah,
I think for that one, for reasons known only to me, that week I put little neck scarves on Aero Santana from Plant 9 from Outer Space, and that's one of the first things that comes up when you look up Dziawer.
Nice.
It's this picture of Dudley Manlove wearing a little red scarf, and
of course the cowboy actors like to wear those colored neck scarves as well. Kenny Duncan, etc. Which is kind of interesting to think about.
So
I don't think that Ed was the one who devised the colored neck scarf system for Swedish erotica loops. I think that was somebody else. I think that might have been Bob Vossi. But in any case, we've been going at this for quite some time.
Yeah,
now,
we have.
I really appreciate you guys. This is great. We've gone far afield. We've had some tech difficulties here. Very Woody.
And I'll be interested to see what, if anything, emerges from these sessions.
We're gonna find out. I hope I really didn't lose that first big chunk of the podcast here today when Keith and Mike were with us. Apologies to them if we did. Apologies to all of you guys for the little rocky afternoon here, but it's been, as always, a ton of fun. I do want to give you guys a chance to kind of close it out. I want to say first one thing: Sex Salvation. Check it out, please. Literally, I swear to God, I literally will clip the end of my finger off on you. I won't do this. I'm not crazy, right? I am crazy, but I'm not that crazy. But if I'm wrong, if Raoul Woody's Sex Salvation 1975 from Errol Goldstripe is not an Ed Wood paperback, if I'm wrong, I'll confess and perhaps harm myself, cut the end of my finger off. I won't do that. But nonetheless, if you do want to check that out, go over to Triple X Books, again, the sponsor. It's important to me because it allows me to continue to get research material and allows me to continue nurturing a really meaningful partnership that's been very helpful in Ed Wood research. And also the guy at Triple X is a good guy as I've gotten to know him. So that as well. Drop it in the order notes. If you order Sex Salvation, order other paperbacks. You can find, I think you can find Bye Bye Brody now at Triple X Books.
Really?
Yeah. You can
With
find
pictures or not with pictures?
with pictures, the whole thing with pictures. So, and lots of related, obviously, West Coast paperbacks that are within this orbit that can help you research Ed Wood to the extent that you want to. I don't think that very many people want to research it to the extent that I do, but I'll continue to do it. But it's important to me because it optimizes my research dollars so that I can avail myself of even more Ed Wood, share that kind of stuff with Jim, who again, he's done yeoman's work on a lengthy text analysis project that is absolutely fascinating, and you're going to hear more about that. You're going to hear more from all three of us. You're going to hear more from Mike and Keith. We'll all be back, and we'll continue to talk more about this. But before I close it and wrap this one up, I want to give you guys last opportunity. So Jim, please, any last thoughts?
I would just support what you said about Sex Salvation. I too would be willing to bet one of your pinkies on
One
that.
of my pinky, okay.
Yes.
I have two, so we can bet them both, right?
But no, I agree with you. It's of all the suspects that we reviewed so far, this is one that has really jumped out to me
Cool.
too.
Cool. So check it out, folks. Check it out. Joe, closing thoughts, please.
It's always great to talk with people who share this ridiculous obsession with Ed Wood. I'm always happy to do it. It's a great way to spend a Saturday. It's a great way to spend a Sunday afternoon. I'm losing track of the days. And just keep watching d2rights.blogspot.com. Whatever we find out about Ed Wood, it goes right there. And yeah, I'm happy to do it.
Very cool. Very cool. Yeah, and more will come. Watch Ed Wood Wednesdays. Watch the Ed Wood Summit podcast. I'm at a point, I've talked to a few guys who tell me, Greg, you got a lot of good research. There's a lot of good factoids that have never been heard before. Why don't you hoard this information? Why don't you can make a lot of money off this? And I'm like, that's not where my head is at, part A. And part B, I really don't think so. Not at this point in time. I think, the Ed Wood movie, Touchstone movie with Johnny Depp, directed by Tim Burton, that was a lightning in a bottle moment that I don't think is going to happen again. I'd be surprised if it did. If it did, that'd be great. More people would become aware of Ed Wood's work, but I don't really think so. In the interim, we'll continue to kick the tires really, really hard here at the Ed Wood Summit podcast and at Ed Wood Wednesdays. I appreciate you guys being my friends and colleagues in Woodology more than you know. We will obviously continue to go down all of these roads. I hope all of you found this beneficial, as always. I hope you derive some fun from watching this podcast if you've slogged all the way through it. And we'll be back here at the Ed Wood Summit podcast, and I hope to see you soon. Thank you, guys. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.